Welcome back to the show. Downing Street says it did not approve Suella Braverman's controversial article on the upcoming protest on Armistice Day. The Home Secretary has come under fire for accusing the police of playing favourites with protesters, saying they treat right-wing and nationalist protesters more harshly than those on the left.
Yeah, Braverman also referred to people planning to attend pro-Palestine protests in London as hate marchers and compared them to protesters in Ireland during the Troubles. It's after she clashed with Met Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley when he said he can't cancel an Armistice Day protest in London because the threshold of serious disorder has not been met.
And Israeli military warns that Hamas leaders are dead men walking as fighting continues in Gaza City.
Right, well, joining us now to discuss a lot of it is Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor of The Sun. Trevor, I mean, there's been a lot of speculation online that Suella Braverman could be facing the sack, that she actually wants to be sacked, and it's some sort of ploy for a leadership bid. The narrative from Number 10 changing a little bit during the day. First of all, they had the article and wanted to make some minor changes. Now they had the article and definitely didn't clear it. What's your take on all of this?
Well, I think there's no doubt that Suella Braverman sees herself as a potential Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. And many of the things she's saying and doing are designed for that purpose. But at the same time, they are resonating with the Conservative Party, which is something that a lot of the cabinet at the moment are not really doing. They're being ultra cautious, and that's not winning votes. They're still 20+ behind in the polls. So Suella's striking the right notes, and the government is struggling to catch up and is even trying in some circumstances.
Well, Trevor, I'm going to come... by the way, we did you wrong there. You're more than just the former Sun political editor. You're the current brilliant political columnist on The Sun, so still gainfully employed. But I'm going to come right out and say it, Trevor. I like Suella Braverman and I like what she says. And I think a lot of people around the country do as well. And when she said that the police take sides, they play favourites with demonstrators, she's right. We saw what they did with the anti-lockdown protesters. You wait until you see a Stop the Migrants march. Look at the way they treat football fans compared with how they treat jihad chanters who are pro-Palestine going through the cities of our country. So what she's saying, and Rishi, of course, is reeling back in horror, what she's saying, I dare to suggest, is popular. And you can't have that in this Tory government. And what she also says, I would say, is conservative. And we can't have that under Rishi. Rishi's not reading the room here, is he?
No, what she's saying is incontrovertible. And as I say, I think that the overwhelming majority of Conservative supporters would agree with everything she said in that article. And I mean, if you look at the way, as you say, that policing has taken place over the last 3 or 4 years in particular, during COVID, when the Black Lives Matter protesters were actually blaring their protests in the faces without masks, wearing masks. They were blaring their protests in the faces. I mean, if you were spreading the disease, you couldn't have picked a better way of doing it. And yet when Sarah Everard's murder was marked by the women demonstrators, they were broken up as if they were going to set fire to Parliament. So, I mean, those two examples on their own suggest that if there's going to be any trouble, then they'll back down. If there's a soft march, then they'll crack down on it hard.
If this was an anti-lockdown march or a Stop the Migrants march, do you suspect, as I do, that Sir Mark Rowley's decision as to whether or not to allow these marches to go ahead might be different? I'm thinking of, I think it was 2 weeks ago, when the big pro-Palestinian march was gathering in Marble Arch to snake its way through London, this time past the Cenotaph. Meanwhile, the police banned a pro-Israeli march in central London. And when the pro-Israeli marchers said, well, can we have a protest in Golders Green, where a lot of the Jewish community live, the police once again said, no, that's too close to the pro-Palestinian march. It was 7 miles away. This is clear bias, isn't it, on the part of the police?
Well, I think that when one of the police officers told a Jewish protester that there were far too many of them, in other words, the pro-Palestinian demonstrators, for the police in their small numbers to be able to deal with them, what would they have said if instead of 50,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators, there had been 50,000 pro-Jewish or pro-Israel demonstrators. I think they would have very rapidly found the numbers, the shields and the batons, and even if necessary, bringing out the army to control a thing like that. That is not going to happen because basically they're running scared of the troublemakers within the Islamic community who are getting away with almost scandalous behavior. I mean, what was happening to those poppy sellers in those railway stations is shocking. And you cannot see, as we have said on the front page of the Sun today, you can go into any railway station today. I was looking around London Bridge to buy a poppy myself today. There are none. Normally the place is full of poppy sellers. They're scared stiff of the demonstrators.
I mean, in the latest chapter of Government versus Sir Mark Rowley and who can ban this march, he's saying, essentially, the legal threshold hasn't been met for me to say to you, there's definitely going to be public disorder, therefore it's within my gift to stop this march from taking place. The government on the outside seeming to say, well, you know, if that's what he says, we're going to have to go with it, but be it on his head. But surely they could actually step in, given that they've had intelligence that half of the groups connected with organising these marches are directly connected to Hamas.
Well, I think you're right, Alex. And I think one of the big problems about this coming weekend is that Tommy Robinson on the extreme right is going to march his troops into London. There's going to be a problem. There are going to be fights, and there are going to be video shots of the thugs of the right beating up probably some innocent Palestinian protesters or pro-Palestinian protesters. And then the whole image turns. And suddenly, instead of Hamas supporting demonstrators, you've got the pro-Jewish community in the shape of Tommy Robinson, and they wouldn't want anything to do with Tommy Robinson. But suddenly the picture will change, and we'll have a whole different dimension on it, broadcast by the BBC, of how the far right's taken over the demonstration process. There you have, I think, is going to happen, is the justification for Mark Rowley to suddenly say, yes, I'm sorry, but we've got to act in future.
And do you think Sir Mark Rowley would be sleeping well at the moment? Because it's quite clear that Rishi yesterday made it plain to him that, OK, you say there's no cause for alarm, there's no cause to worry about a serious threat of disruption and violence with this protest, this Armistice Day protest. OK, but if you go ahead with this, if you give it the green light, on your head be it. That's basically what I think the government has said to him. I think it's quite clear that the Tories aren't keen on this march at all. Rowley wants to go ahead with it. Rishi has said, OK, you say no violence, we'll see. If it does happen, you're in trouble.
Well, I think that if Sir Mark Rowley is sleeping well at night, then he's one of the few people in Britain today who is. I think this is a really serious problem, and it isn't going to end this weekend. It's going to get worse as long as cars are in flames and as long as those hostages are still being held. I mean, why aren't the demonstrators, instead of calling for a ceasefire, why aren't they calling on Hamas to release those hostages? I mean, surely that's a much more urgent message to get across, and indeed might actually result in a pause in hostilities there. But nothing will as long as those hostages are being held and likely to be killed by their captors.
I mean, when we look at these marches and see that there are certainly elements within the pro-Palestinian marches who are pushing an ideology and essentially a sort of, you know, eons-old religious battle, if you will, do you think that those people reacting to Suella Braverman's comparison, let's say, to the sectarian violence and marches during the Troubles is confected offence, or has she just completely missed the mark with those comments?
No, I don't think, if anything, I think she's underestimated the seriousness of the nature of this protest movement. And I think that what we should be comparing it with is not the IRA, but what was happening in Germany in the 1930s. I mean, if you were a Jew walking the streets of London today, would you feel safe? And if you did, would you be sensible in feeling safe? I certainly wouldn't.
No, I have a lot of Jewish friends, and they've never experienced anything like this. And comparisons are being made to, you know, Germany in the 1930s. I mean, there is a rise of anti-Semitic hatred in this country, which is extremely alarming. And I don't think it's helped by these pro-Palestinian marches and the police basically standing by and applauding them. So, oh, you chant jihad, fine. Oh, from the river to the sea, Palestine, oh, you go right ahead. 7 arrests 2 weeks ago. 100,000 marched through the streets of London, all chant, oh, not all chant, some chanting jihad, 7 arrests. Last weekend, hundreds of thousands all over the country in the major cities. 29 arrests all over the country. This is the police not doing their job. Am I right?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. What you've got to remember is that we've got a comparatively tiny population of Jewish people in this country. I think certainly in the hundreds of thousands, not the tens of millions, not tens of millions, but certainly 4 to 6 million Muslims who are more or less entirely in favor of this pro-Palestinian demonstrations. So I think that across the world, there are only about 20-odd million Jews, and yet they are, and it doesn't take very many, actually, to upset the democratic and rule of law in a country. It is very easy to take for granted what we've had for the last 50 or 60 years, which is peace and tranquility and civilized conduct. That can flip over in no time at all. And what we risk here, I think, is that eventually somewhere in Europe, we'll see another Kristallnacht, in which the Jewish population really have their lives at risk. And that's something that is almost horrific to contemplate in this the 21st century.
Yeah,
and yet we're on the verge of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so awful. It is definitely, it seems plausible now, and that's scarcely imaginable. Trevor, great to talk to you as always. That's Trevor Kavanagh there.